My name is Miles Corbin. I hold a Master of Science in Environmental Science and Resource Management and have served with the National Park Service for 7 years. My official title is Park Ranger, a designation that conjures images of wide-brimmed hats, serene vistas, and a quiet communion with nature. For my first 5 years, spent in the comparatively tame landscapes of Shenandoah, that image wasn't entirely inaccurate. The job was a predictable cycle of trail maintenance, interpretive programs for tourists, and the occasional lost hiker. The most pressing dangers were dehydration and black bears that had grown too comfortable with improperly secured coolers. 6 months ago, I accepted a transfer to Blackbriar Gap National Park, a vast, remote territory carved out of one of the most rugged and isolated corners of the Appalachian Range. On paper, it was a promotion, a lead role in a park known for its pristine, untouched wilderness. In reality, it was a posting few wanted. Blackbriar Gap is ancient. The mountains themselves are a staggering 480 million years old, a geological fact that feels less like trivia and more like a palpable presence when you're deep within the woods. They are older than the bones of the first dinosaurs, older than the very concept of trees. They have had a long, long time to sit and watch. The day-to-day reality of the job quickly dispelled any lingering romanticism. The park is a mix of stunning beauty and frustrating mundanity. I spend as much time answering inane questions from visitors. If we leave now, can we drive the whole 400-mile parkway in an hour? As I do monitoring the delicate ecosystem. I've dealt with RV campers complaining about birds pooping on their brand, new rigs and hikers who seem to think the clearly marked trails are merely suggestions. It's a job that requires the patience of a saint and the pragmatism of a groundskeeper. But Blackbriar Gap is different. The isolation is profound. At night, the darkness is absolute, a heavy, ink-black blanket that swallows light and sound. The locals, the few who live in the unincorporated townships dotting the park's edge, have a saying: the mountains keep what they're given. It's a piece of folklore I initially dismissed as charmingly rustic. I don't dismiss it anymore. The incident that prompted me to write this occurred 3 nights ago. At a place called Hemlock Ridge, I got a call on the radio about an unauthorized campfire in a restricted watershed area. It was just after 10 p.m., the air crisp and cold. I decided to go in on foot rather than take the truck. You'd be surprised how quietly a man can move through these woods when he knows them. It's a skill I've honed over the years, and it often gives me a small, professional satisfaction to come upon a group of rowdy trespassers before they even know I'm there. It also serves as a constant, humbling reminder of how easily something else could do the same to me. I found them, a group of 4 college students, huddled around a sputtering fire. But they weren't drinking or laughing. They were terrified. Their faces were pale in the firelight, and one of them, a young man in a university sweatshirt, was visibly shaking. "Thank God," he said, his voice trembling. "You have to help us." I went through the standard procedure, my voice calm and authoritative. "Folks, you're in a restricted area. I'm going to have to ask you to extinguish this fire and pack up your gear." "It's not that," a young woman stammered, pointing a shaky finger into the impenetrable darkness behind them. "There's something in the woods." We heard it, a woman screaming. I felt that familiar internal sigh. "Ma'am, what you likely heard was a vixen, a female fox. Their call can sound remarkably like a person screaming. Scares visitors all the time." "No," the first young man insisted, stepping forward. "This was different. And then there was this." He fumbled with his phone, his fingers clumsy with fear. He shoved the device into my hand. I took a picture. I just pointed my phone into the dark and hit the flash. I looked at the screen. The image was what I expected, a chaotic mess of overexposed leaves and tree trunks. The digital flash failing to penetrate more than a few feet into the woods. But then I saw them. High up in the canopy, nestled among the black branches, were two enormous, perfectly circular orbs of glowing red light. They weren't a reflection. They weren't lens flare. They seemed to possess their own internal luminosity, and they were spaced just far enough apart to suggest a head of impossible size. They looked, I thought with a sudden, cold lurch in my stomach, like basketballs filled with fire. Right after this, the young woman whispered, her voice barely audible. Everything went quiet. No crickets, no frogs. Nothing, the whole forest just stopped. That detail chilled me more than the photograph. An unnatural silence is a sign of a predator. A large one. It means every smaller creature in the vicinity is hiding, holding its breath, praying not to be noticed. I maintained my professional composure, but my own internal sense of order was beginning to fray. I escorted the students back to their car, my hand resting on the grip of the sidearm I carry, but have never had to draw. I told them it was probably a drone or an optical illusion caused by the atmospheric conditions. I was lying to them and to myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of those red eyes was burned into my mind. I thought about the old stories, the park's unsettling history of disappearances, and the quiet, knowing looks of the locals. I realized that the standard Park Service pamphlets were dangerously inadequate for a place like Blackbriar Gap. People needed to know. So, I am posting the rules. Not all of them, just the ones a visitor might need to survive a weekend. These are not suggestions. They are not quaint bits of local folklore. They are the official protocols for Blackbriar Gap National Park. Follow them. Your life may depend on it. Blackbriar Gap National Park. Visitor and staff protocols. Unofficial addenda. Rule 1.0 Zala. Do not enter the park between sunset and sunrise without authorization. Reason, consequence. Standard safety protocol. Wildlife is more active and navigation is hazardous. Rule 2.0 Z. If you hear an animal cry that sounds human, it is an animal. Report the location to the ranger station, but do not investigate. Reason, consequence, misidentification of predators, foxes, bobcats, mountain lions is common and can lead to dangerous encounters. Rule 3.0A. If you hear whistling or your name being called from the woods, you did not. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. Continue walking and do not look behind you. Rule 4.0I. Do not approach or photograph any unexplained lights in the sky or tree line. Extinguish all personal light sources and return to your vehicle or designated shelter immediately. Reasoned out your consequence. Unpredictable geological and atmospheric phenomena have been reported. Direct exposure may be harmful. Rule 5.0. If you pass one of the park's historical cemeteries, do not speak until you are at least 100 yards past the boundary wall. This includes whispering. Reason, consequence, a sign of respect for the interred. Sound can travel in unexpected ways in the valleys. Rule 6.0 and all rocking chairs in historical exhibits e.g. the Miller cabin must be left completely stationary upon departure. Ensure they are not in motion from wind or touch. Reason, tiers, consequence. These are delicate antiques. Unnecessary motion can cause damage to the artifacts. I know how Rule 3.0 and the addendum to Rule 6.0 sound. I know they seem insane. The official explanation for Rule 6.0 is about preserving the artifacts, and I've left the reason for Rule 3.0 blank because there is no rational explanation I can write in an official capacity. Just trust me. I posted this list on the park's community blog and pinned it to the top of the main information page less than an hour ago. As I was typing the final sentence, the radio on my desk crackled to life. It was Sarah, one of the seasonal rangers, her voice tight with panic. "Miles, we have a situation at the Miller cabin. A missing child. A family from Ohio, their son Lucas. He's 6 years old. They said he was just on the porch with them a minute ago, and then he was gone." A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled over me. The Miller cabin is the park's centerpiece historical exhibit, a perfectly restored 19th century homestead complete with period-appropriate furniture, including a large oak rocking chair on the front porch. I keyed the mic, my own voice sounding distant and hollow in my ears. "Sarah, ask the mother something for me. Be calm when you ask it." "Go ahead, Miles." "The rocking chair on the porch," I said, my gaze fixed on Rule 6.0 on my screen. "Ask her if it was still moving when they noticed he was gone." The silence on the other end of the radio stretched for an eternity, filled only with crackling static. When Sarah's voice returned, it was a strained whisper. She's not sure. She says the boy was playing with it, pushing it back and forth. She thinks, oh God, Miles, she thinks it was. The invitation had been sent, and something had just accepted. The static on the radio hissed for a moment after Sarah's words, a sound that suddenly felt like the universe drawing a sharp, ragged breath. She thinks it was. The rocking chair. The invitation. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice betraying none of the cold, spider-like fear crawling up my spine. "Secure the scene. Standard missing person protocol. Get teams organized. I want a 5-mile perimeter search, starting now. And Sarah, keep the parents at the cabin. Don't let them join the search." "Understood, Miles." I didn't wait for a sign-off. I was already out the door of the ranger station, grabbing my high-powered flashlight and search pack. The night air was cold, but I was colder. The drive to the Miller cabin is usually a peaceful 10-minute crawl along a winding gravel road. I made it in 6, the truck's suspension groaning in protest. The whole way, my mind was a frantic slideshow of worst-case scenarios, but none of them involved a kidnapper or a wild animal. My fears were older, formless, and rooted in the very soil of this park. A 6-year-old boy is a fragile thing. In a place like Blackbriar Gap, he's a whisper in a hurricane. The scene at the Miller cabin was exactly what I expected and dreaded: controlled chaos. The single flashing light bar on Sarah's patrol vehicle cast pulsing, rhythmic shadows of blue and red across the log walls of the historic cabin, making the familiar structure look alien and sinister. The parents were on the porch, the mother wrapped in a park-issued blanket, her body racked with silent sobs. The father stood beside her, his face a mask of disbelief, staring into the impenetrable wall of trees that began just yards from the cabin's clearing. He was looking for his son in a place that has swallowed men whole. Sarah met me at the edge of the porch. She's young, barely 23, a seasonal ranger with a degree in biology and a boundless enthusiasm that, at this moment, had been completely extinguished. Her eyes were wide with a fear that went beyond a lost child. It was the fear of the why. "I've got 2 teams sweeping the primary grid," she said, her voice low. "Standard procedure." "But Miles," the dad said something. "The boy. Lucas, he wasn't just pushing the chair. He was talking to it." My blood ran cold. Talking to it. What did he say? The father wasn't paying close attention at first. He thought it was just a kid's game. But he heard Lucas say, "Are you lonely?" And then, "I'll be your friend," he said. It was like he was having a conversation with someone. I closed my eyes, fighting a wave of nausea. Rule 6.0 wasn't just about not leaving a chair rocking. That was the final, physical act. The true violation, the one that opened the door, was the acknowledgement, the engagement. The boy hadn't just invited a spirit in, he had offered it his friendship. I walked over to the parents. I knelt in front of the mother, my voice gentle but firm, the way you talk to a victim in shock. My name is Miles Corbin. I'm the lead ranger. We're doing everything we can. I need you to think very carefully. Before Lucas disappeared, did he say anything else? Anything strange? Did he mention seeing anyone? She looked at me, her eyes hollow. No one. He was right here. She gestured vaguely at the porch. He loved that old chair. He was laughing, pushing it back and forth. I told him to be careful with it, that it was an antique. Her voice broke. He said he was pushing it for his new friend. The man with no eyes. The words hung in the cold night air, devoid of meaning for anyone else, but for me, they were a death sentence. It was a detail from a half-forgotten piece of local lore, a story the old-timers tell about the things that live in the deepest parts of the woods, things that were here before the trees, things that have faces, but not always features. They are drawn to the innocent, to the lonely. I stood up, my professional mask firmly in place. "We'll find him," I said, a promise I had no right to make. I turned back to Sarah and the other 2 rangers who had arrived. "Scrap the standard grid search. It's too slow, and we're not looking for a boy who simply wandered off." I pulled out my own park map, spreading it on the hood of the truck. These woods don't work like that. He won't be in a logical place. I drew a series of lines on the map, my marker moving with a certainty that felt like it was coming from somewhere outside myself. "Team 1, you take the ridge. Don't go down into the hollows. I don't care what you hear. Stick to high ground. Team 2, you'll sweep east, toward the old quarry. And listen to me," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "You follow the rules. All of them. You hear your name, you don't. You see lights, you turn yours off and you get low. And if you hear whistling, you don't answer it. You don't investigate. You turn back immediately. Am I clear?" They nodded, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning fear. They were trained for bears and lost hikers, not for this. I went alone, heading north into the oldest, densest part of the park. It's a place the trails avoid, a place where the canopy is so thick that it's twilight even at noon. The silence was the first thing I noticed. Just like the students had described, it was an absolute, crushing void of sound. No crickets, no frogs, no rustle of nocturnal animals. It was the silence of a held breath. The entire forest was waiting. I moved slowly, my senses on fire. Every snap of a twig under my boot sounded like a gunshot. My flashlight beam cut a nervous, trembling path through the oppressive darkness. I wasn't just looking for a lost boy. I was looking for a sign, a marker, something to tell me I was on the right path. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, I found it. There, placed neatly on a moss-covered boulder, was a small, red sneaker. It was Lucas's. It wasn't dropped or torn off in a struggle. It was set down carefully, almost reverently, with the laces still tied. It was a breadcrumb, a taunt. As I reached for my radio to report the find, a sound drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it was the whistling I'd warned my rangers about. But it wasn't. It was music. A simple, lilting melody, like something from a child's music box. It was coming from deeper in the woods, from a direction I knew led nowhere, but to a sheer cliff face. I followed the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. The melody grew stronger, a delicate, tinkling tune that was horribly out of place in this suffocating darkness. It was a sound of pure innocence, and in that place, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. The music led me to the base of the cliff, a solid wall of ancient rock that rose hundreds of feet into the night sky. And there, tucked into a small, dark opening I'd never seen before, an unmarked cave, no bigger than a manhole, was a small, wooden music box. It was open, its tiny metal cylinder slowly rotating, plinking out its ghostly tune into the silent woods. I knelt, my light shaking in my hand. The music box was old, but it was clean, free of dirt or decay. And sitting right next to it, just inside the mouth of that dark, waiting cave, was the other red sneaker. My radio crackled to life, the sound so sudden and loud it made me flinch. It was Sarah, her voice strained, breathless with panic. "Miles!" Team 1 found something. It's a set of footprints, small ones, a child's. But they're not alone. There's another set with them. I keyed the mic. "What do they look like, Sarah?" There was a pause, and I could hear her talking to someone in the background. When she came back on, her voice was a choked whisper. "They're barefoot, Miles. Long, thin feet, and they're walking backward. The tracks are leading away from the cabin, but the footprints are facing it. Like something was leading the boy into the woods, but never turned its back on the home it just left." Sarah's words crackled over the radio, each one a shard of ice in my ear. The footprints are facing it. Like something was leading the boy into the woods, but never turned its back on the home it just left. I stared at the black, gaping maw of the cave, the second red sneaker a silent accusation at its entrance. The image Sarah's words painted in my mind was sickeningly clear: a small boy, his hand held by a tall, thin creature, being led deeper into the ancient forest. But the creature wasn't looking where it was going. It was walking backward, its eyeless face perpetually fixed on the Miller cabin, on the source of the invitation. It was savoring the theft, refusing to break its gaze from the scene of its triumph. The music box had fallen silent. The woods were once again wrapped in that profound, unnatural hush, a silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any sound. The cave was a wound in the side of the cliff, exhaling a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. It smelled of damp stone, wet rot, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood and ozone. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and training, that Lucas was not in there. This was just another part of the game. The sneaker, the music box, they were breadcrumbs, laid by a predator that was enjoying the hunt. But they were the only breadcrumbs I had. "Sarah, I'm at the base of the north cliff face," I said into my radio, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I've found an unmarked cave. Lucas's other shoe is here. I'm going in." "Miles, no!" "Wait for backup. That's against protocol." "The protocol doesn't cover this," I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. "This thing is leading us on a trail. I can't afford to lose it. Maintain the perimeter. Do not, under any circumstances, approach my position. If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, you call county sheriff and tell them we have a confirmed abduction by an unknown hostile." I didn't wait for her reply. I clicked off the radio, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm the frantic drumming in my chest, and switched on the high, beam setting of my flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, but the cave seemed to drink the light, swallowing it just a few feet past the entrance. I unholstered my sidearm, the weight of it a small, inadequate comfort, and stepped across the threshold. The temperature dropped instantly, the air thick and still. The cave wasn't a natural formation, not entirely. The floor was uneven, but the walls were too smooth, curving in ways that suggested they had been shaped by more than just water and time. My light played over the stone, and I saw them carvings. They weren't the geometric patterns of the Cherokee or any native tribe I was familiar with. They were deep, gouged lines forming impossible shapes, spirals that seemed to twist and wreathe in the moving light. I moved deeper, my boots crunching softly on the gritty floor. The beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground. It wasn't another of Lucas's belongings. It was a small, leather shoe, the kind a child would have worn a century ago, its buckle rusted and green with age. A few feet beyond that, half buried in the dirt, was a tarnished silver locket. I pried it open with my thumbnail. It was empty, the twin glass panes that should have held tiny portraits shattered. This wasn't the first time a child had been led into this cave. The rocking chair at the Miller cabin wasn't the first invitation. This place, this entity, was a fixture of the park, a predator that had been hunting these woods for generations. A new sound reached me, cutting through the silence. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from deeper within the cave. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, that I was walking deeper into the trap, but the thought of Lucas, of all the children before him, pushed me forward. I followed the sound around a sharp bend in the tunnel. The tapping grew louder, a frantic, wooden clatter. I swept my light across the chamber and found the source. Sitting on a flat rock was another of Lucas's toys, a little wooden woodpecker on a string, bobbing up and down as if an unseen hand were pulling the cord. Tap, tap, tap. It was another taunt, another piece of the game. And next to it, on the cave wall, was a new carving. It was crude, scratched into the stone with something sharp. It was a child's drawing. A stick figure of a boy with a smiling face, holding hands with a very tall, very thin figure. The figure had no face, just a smooth, blank oval for a head. They were standing in front of a row of simple crosses. A cemetery. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just any cemetery. I recognized the distinctive shape of the old iron gate in the drawing. The Blackwood Cemetery. The oldest, most isolated cemetery in the park. The one mentioned in the addendum to Rule 5.000. If you pass one of the park's historical cemeteries, do not speak until you are at least 100 yards past the boundary wall. The entity wasn't keeping Lucas here. It was taking him there. It was a pilgrimage. I spun around, ready to race out of the cave, to radio Sarah, to get my teams moving. But as I turned, a sound from the darkness behind me froze me in place. Mila's. It was a whisper, coming from the blackness of the tunnel I had just emerged from, and it was in my own voice. A perfect, chilling mimicry of my own tone, my own cadence. I stood paralyzed, my light aimed at the empty darkness. Rule 3.0 screamed in my head. If you hear your name being called from the woods, you did not. It was testing me. It wanted me to acknowledge it, to answer, to break the rule. I forced my legs to move, one deliberate, agonizing step at a time. I did not run. I did not speak. I walked toward the entrance, my back to the whispering voice. The mimicry shifted. The whisper of my own name was replaced by the terrified, high-pitched cry of a child. "Ranger Miles, help me! Please, it's dark! It's got me!" It was Lucas's voice. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to run back, to answer the boy's plea. But I knew it wasn't him. It was a trick. A cruel, predatory lie. I squeezed my eyes shut, clenched my jaw, and kept walking, the sound of the boy's desperate sobs echoing off the stone walls behind me. I burst out of the cave, stumbling into the cold night air, gasping as if I had been holding my breath the entire time. The forest was still silent, waiting. I fumbled for my radio, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. "Sarah, come in! Where is Team 1? What's their position?" The radio crackled. A burst of static, then Sarah's voice, tight with a new and terrible panic. "Miles, God, Miles, I can't reach them. Their last transmission was 10 minutes ago. They were doing a sweep near the old church." She didn't have to finish. The old, dilapidated church stood on the grounds of the Blackwood Cemetery. The entity wasn't just playing a game with a lost child anymore. It was hunting my rangers. The radio went dead after Sarah's frantic message about Team 1. But her words echoed in my skull, a frantic, looping drumbeat of dread. I can't reach them. Their last transmission was 10 minutes ago. They were doing a sweep near the old church. The old church. The Blackwood Cemetery. I didn't waste another second. I burst from the tree line, leaving the taunting music box and the child's sneaker behind in the suffocating darkness of the cave. The entity had laid a trail of breadcrumbs, and while I was following them, it had flanked me. It had gone after my people. This was no longer just a rescue mission for a lost child. It was an attack. My truck roared to life, its headlights cutting a desperate swath through the oppressive night. The gravel road to Blackwood Cemetery was unmaintained, a treacherous ribbon of potholes and loose stone that snaked through the darkest part of the park. I pushed the vehicle harder than I ever had before, the engine screaming in protest as branches scraped and clawed at the windows like skeletal fingers. Every shadow seemed to twist into a tall, thin shape. Every glint of light seemed to resolve into a pair of glowing red eyes. The journey felt like an eternity, each second, stretching into a lifetime of grim possibilities. These were my rangers, good people. One of them, a young man named David, had a baby on the way. They were trained for emergencies, for search and rescue, for law enforcement. But they weren't trained for this. They weren't prepared for a predator that walks backward and whispers with stolen voices. I saw the iron gates of the cemetery long before I reached them, stark and black against the pale wash of my headlights. The gate, which should have been chained and locked, hung wide open, an explicit invitation into the gloom beyond. I slammed the truck to a halt, the tires skidding on the loose gravel. The first thing I saw was their patrol vehicle, parked haphazardly by the gate, its driver, side door still ajar. The second thing I saw sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. On the dusty ground beside the vehicle were 3 sets of boot prints, the tracks of my rangers, and alongside them, another set of prints, long, thin, and barefoot. And they were facing the wrong way. The entity had met them here. It had led them from their vehicle, walking backward, its eyeless face never breaking contact with them as it drew them into the field of leaning, weathered headstones. I grabbed my shotgun from the rack behind my seat. It felt heavy and useless, a tool for a world of flesh and blood, not for whatever this was. But I took it anyway. I took it because doing nothing was not an option. Rule 5.0 was clear. If you pass one of the park's historical cemeteries, do not speak until you are at least 100 yards past the boundary wall. This includes whispering. I stepped through the gate, the cold of the place seeping into my bones. The air was still and heavy, thick with the silence of ages. The only sound was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I moved past the first few rows of tombstones, my light sweeping across the eroded names of settlers and farmers who had been laid to rest here centuries ago. This was a place of respect, of quiet remembrance. But tonight, it was a hunting ground. I saw a flicker of light near the dilapidated old church at the far end of the cemetery. It was a flashlight, lying on its side in the grass. Its beam pointed at the church's crumbling foundation. It was David's. I recognized the paracord lanyard he had braided for it himself. As I approached, a voice whispered from the darkness of the church's empty doorway. "Miles, is that you? Thank God! It's got my leg. I think it's broken." It was David's voice, full of pain and relief. My own name, a plea for help. But I knew better. Rule 3.0. If you hear your name being called from the woods, you did not. It was the thing from the cave. It was using their voices now. I raised the shotgun, my knuckles white. I didn't answer. I didn't acknowledge the voice. I kept my mouth shut, honoring Rule 5.0 with every ounce of my willpower. The silence was my only shield. The voice changed, shifting to Sarah's panicked tone. "Miles, get back! It's a trap! It's right here!" I kept walking, my boots crunching softly on the dead leaves. I swept my light past the church toward a large, ancient oak tree that dominated the center of the cemetery. And that's when I saw them. Lucas was standing at the base of the oak tree, perfectly still. He wasn't crying or scared. He was just watching. And next to him stood the creature. It was impossibly tall and thin, its limbs like stretched ligaments, its skin the pale, gray color of dead bark. It had no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a smooth, blank expanse of skin where its face should have been. It was holding Lucas's hand. At its feet lay the still forms of my 3 rangers. They weren't moving. The creature turned its blank face toward me. It didn't have eyes, but I felt its gaze, a physical pressure, a wave of ancient malice and hunger. It wanted a reaction. It wanted me to scream, to shoot, to speak. It wanted me to break the rule of this place, to give it purchase, to feed it with my terror. A new voice entered my mind, not through my ears, but directly into my thoughts. It was a chorus of whispers, the voices of every person this thing had ever taken, a cacophony of fear and despair. It showed me images, the college students by the fire, their faces pale with terror, the mother at the cabin, her heart breaking, my rangers, their last moments filled with confusion and horror. It was trying to break me from the inside out. I held my ground. I didn't speak. I didn't fire. I just stood there, my silence a defiant act of war. I remembered the drawing in the cave, the boy, the faceless man, and the cemetery. This was its sanctuary, its larder, and the rules were its covenant. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered the shotgun. I let it rest at my side. I looked at Lucas, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear. Confusion. He was in a trance, caught in the creature's web, but some part of him was still there. The creature tilted its head, a gesture of curiosity. It had offered a game of terror, and I had refused to play. It had expected me to be a screaming, terrified victim. It didn't know what to do with a man who simply stood in silence. I took a single, slow step forward. The creature reacted. It let go of Lucas's hand and raised one of its long, thin arms, pointing a finger like a shard of bone directly at me. The whispers in my head intensified, screaming at me to run, to fight, to die. I took another step. I was inside the 100-yard boundary. I was breaking the spirit of the rule with every footfall, but I was holding to the letter of it. I would not speak. I would not give it the satisfaction of my voice. I was 10 feet away now. I could see the faint, shimmering distortion in the air around the creature, like heat haze off summer asphalt. I could smell the ozone and the ancient decay. I looked past it, at Lucas, and I held out my hand. The boy blinked, as if waking from a long dream. He looked at my outstretched hand, then back at the silent, faceless thing beside him. He took a hesitant step toward me. The creature emitted a sound, not from a mouth, but from its entire being. A low, vibrating hum of pure rage. The ground beneath my feet trembled, but it didn't move to stop the boy. It was as if my refusal to engage had bound it, my silence creating a space that its power couldn't cross. Lucas took another step, and then another, until he was close enough to take my hand. His small fingers were ice cold. I closed my hand around his and began to back away, never turning my back on the creature, my eyes locked on its blank, horrifying face. We backed away, step by agonizing step, past the bodies of my rangers, past the old church, past the rows of forgotten graves. The creature just stood there, motionless, its featureless face a mask of silent fury. It had been cheated of its prize. We crossed the invisible 100-yard line. We reached the iron gate. I bundled Lucas into the passenger seat of my truck, slammed the door, and ran to the driver's side. As I threw the truck into gear, I risked one last look back. The creature was gone. The cemetery was empty, save for my fallen rangers and the silent, watching stones. But as I spun the truck around, my headlights swept across the tree line at the edge of the road. And for a single heart-stopping second, I saw them. Two enormous, basketball-sized orbs of glowing red light high in the canopy, watching us go. The invitation had been refused. The game had been won. But I knew, with a chilling certainty that would haunt the rest of my days, that the mountains keep what they're given. And now, they owed me 3.